EW series engines first appeared under the hood of PSA Cars, an association of Peugeot and Citroën, in 1998. They replaced the outdated units of the XU family, which were released in the mid-80s and are well known from the Peugeot 405 and Citroën Xantia cars. Initially, new engines of 1.8 liters, EW7, and 2.0 liters, EW10, were offered, and later a larger one was added, 2.2 liters, EW12. All of them received a DOHC gas distribution system and a 16-valve head. The cylinder block, unlike its predecessor, is entirely aluminum. The 2-liter differs from the smaller 1.8-liter not only in the increased cylinder diameter, 85 versus 82.7 mm, but also in the piston stroke, 88 versus 81.4 mm. Both versions have different pistons and crankshaft. In the case of the 2.2-liter engine, the cylinder diameter is increased by only 1 mm, 86 mm, and the piston stroke has increased to 96 mm. Accordingly, other pistons and crankshaft were introduced. To maintain smooth engine operation, which is very difficult when there is a large difference between the diameter and stroke of the piston, a cartridge with balancing shafts was used. Large volume 4-cylinder units are characterized by good elasticity and dynamics. The same is true for the 2.2 EW12, which performs just fine. In its heyday, the EW series didn't exactly get rave reviews. Even though the new engines, unlike the XU with a 16-valve head, offered significantly better elasticity at low and medium speeds. They were also a bit more economical. However, 1.8 and 2.0 are not sprinters. The original versions, produced before 2000, complied with the Euro 2 emission standard. However, today, due to their considerable age, such engines are becoming increasingly rare. Options introduced in 2000 have been modified to meet more stringent Euro 3 standards. They were designated EW7J4, 1.8, and EW10J4, 2.0. The presence of 2 lambda probes from the very beginning of production suggests that the EW series engines were immediately developed to meet the -3 Euro standard. One sensor is located in front of the catalyst, and the second, the so-called control, is located behind it. I have good news for you. Now, if you are planning to buy a used car, or learn more about your car, you no longer need to search for the information you need on the internet. We have collected everything in one place for you, on the website carme.pro. Here you can find out everything about the car, what brakes and at what mileage, any problems with engines, chassis or gearboxes, which trim levels are better not to mess with, and how not to lose money buying a used car. You will learn all this on carme.pro. Usually having 2 oxygen sensors only makes life more difficult. They age naturally, and a slight deviation from the norm can awaken alert electronics that limit engine operation. In practice, in the case of EW, it is usually done only by the electronic indicator lighting up. No noticeable changes in engine operation occur. Since 2005, Euro 4 restrictions came into force, and the engines of the EW family were modified to comply with them. Modified units can be recognized by the A index, for example, EW7A and EW10A. Options for -4 Euro are also visually different from older engines, which is noticeable after opening the hood. They all use an electronically controlled throttle. Perhaps the greatest changes affected the 1.8 and 2.0-liter engines. They received a variable valve timing system for the intake camshaft, which led to an increase in power from 117 to 125 horsepower and from 135 to 140 horsepower, respectively. 2.216V, on the contrary, was equipped with an intake shaft phase regulator from the first days. However, the phase variator here is designed somewhat differently. Engines prepared for -4 Euro lasted until 2010. Then the -5 Euro standard came into force, and they were no longer able to fit into the framework. 2.0 HPI. Direct fuel injection is quite common today. Its origins lie in the mid-90s, and Mitsubishi became the pioneer with its GDI. Then came FSI from VW, IDE from Renault and JTS from Alfa Romeo. PSA offered a 2.0 HPI. Technically, the unit was based on the 2-liter EW10J4. It received the index EW10D and provided 140 forces. The block has changed slightly, but the cylinder head has become completely different. Primarily due to the need to provide space for fuel injectors. Valve control was given to roller rockers and hydraulic compensators, while the original engines used direct control via cup-type tappets. However, there were hydraulic compensators there too. The HPI engine was supplied for only 2 years, from 2001 to 2003, and was installed only in the Peugeot 406 and Citroën C51. There was little interest in it, since there were few advantages in terms of performance. Worse, anyone who dared to buy an HPI must have had many sleepless nights. The first generation of these engines had a tendency to accumulate deposits, so it was difficult to reach 100,000 kilometers without repair. The situation was so serious that even authorized services no longer wanted to undertake HPI repairs. Not only were a number of parts different from those in a conventional engine, but they also created additional problems. As you understand, the HPI version failed. Luckily, you're unlikely to find it today. But the rest of the EW family engines are quite common, not only in large Peugeot 406 and 407, as well as Citroën C5 of both generations, but also in small cars. For hot hatchbacks, Peugeot 206 RC and Citroën C4 VTS, an EW10J4S with an output of 177 horsepower was prepared. Engines of the EW series are sometimes reproached for increased oil consumption. It is still unknown what the true cause of oil burn is. Some blame the valve seals, others blame the piston rings. The truth is somewhere in the middle. The problem does not affect everyone. There are engines where the owner does not have to add oil between changes, but there are those where it is necessary to add a liter for every 1,000 kilometers. Practice shows that most often the smallest one fails, 1.8. Fortunately, all engines have an oil level sensor, the readings of which can be seen after turning the ignition key to the second pre-start position. In addition to increased oil consumption, other ailments also occur. Some versions used a radiator fan that rotated at a constant speed. But in most cases a 2-speed fan was installed. In this case, instead of one control relay, 2 were used. And only the relay for high speed sometimes failed. As a result, the fan rotated without stopping, even when it was not needed. For example, after starting in cold weather. Then the engine might not warm up to operating temperature at all. In addition, there are problems with electrical wiring. Difficulty starting a cold engine is another common defect. After the first attempt, the engine stalls, and after the second, it starts, but for some time it troubles noticeably. The reason is that not all cylinders start working immediately. This is due to miscalculations in the design of valve pushers and hydraulic compensators. Since these are design flaws, installing new parts will not solve the problem in the long run. Moreover, replacement will be quite expensive. Some solve the problem by using hydraulic tappets from the largest of the EW family engines, i.e. 2.2 liters, EW12. The paradox is that, according to the original spare parts catalog, the pushers in all engines, except HPI, are the same, the part numbers are identical. But the dilemma described above may have another cause, a clogged intake manifold. This is often due to bad fuel. At one time, the manufacturer recommended periodically cleaning the intake tract, which partially eliminated the problem. The engine jerks after adding gas for the same reason. But just a couple of tens of meters, and everything is fine again. If the engine sounds like grandma's sewing machine, then it's time to bury the hydraulic pushers. This happens with engines that have operated for a long time with a minimum oil level, which is not uncommon with increased oil consumption. Over the years, other complications may arise. For example, a clogged throttle valve or failure of a secondary electric pump. The pump pumps fresh air into the exhaust pipe, which helps reduce harmful emissions. A timing belt is used to drive the timing belt. You should follow the recommendations for its timely replacement. If the belt breaks, the valves bend. Despite a number of problems, the EW series engines can be considered reliable, especially compared to the more modern 1.6 VTI and THP engines of the EP series.